of praise, lifting, lifting.
What's going on, family? My name is Maurice F. Martin, and this is another Motivational Tuesday. Listen, today we are about to hit on multiple topics. I would say prepare for an emotional roller coaster. This one is going to make you think. It might make you tear up. It's going to make you feel something. That is a guarantee. Today, my guest is a close personal friend, someone who I grew up with, went to high school with, played a pivotal role in my life in high school. And now his perspective is so unique when it comes to being in this country. Right now, there's a lot of division as we're recording with police officers and people of color. And Joe's perspective on all this stuff is just unique. He's not the expert at anything, and he's not trying to paint himself that way. He's just a person with a story to share that I think you'll be able to relate to and learn from. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Sgt Garrix. Now, Joseph is the social emotional learning manager, or one of them, for the Cleveland Metro schools. So he is shaping the youth of America today, and hopefully he will help shape your perspective today as well. So Joe, what's going on, man?
Hey, Maurice, it's great to be here today. I'm really happy that we're able to do this.
Absolutely. I'm so happy too. You know, we were going to film this a couple weeks ago, and it was before kind of some of the turmoil started to break out, and that interview didn't work. And it kind of seems like maybe that happened for a reason.
Yeah, I would definitely say, that everything happens for a reason, and that this is very timely for the interview that we're about to embark on in this discussion.
Yes, absolutely. So at the start of this, just give people a sense of, who is Sgt Garrix?
Wow. So I've been an educator, and dare I say a passion educator, for 17 years now, which is crazy to think that fast. Most of that time was spent in the classroom as a social studies teacher for middle and high school. About 6 years ago, I transitioned over to Cleveland schools to become a social emotional learning manager. And a lot of people, when they ask me what I do, I kind of describe the role rather than just the title, because you get that puzzled look like, well, what is that? So,
right.
So I support roughly around 30 schools in the district around social emotional learning initiatives. And what that looks like is trauma-informed care, looks like our anti-bullying motion initiatives. So specific social emotional learning curriculum like PAS and Second Step. And really, what social emotional learning is based and rooted in is 5 competencies, which is self-management, social awareness, self-awareness, responsible decision-making. And really what this is these are skills that we're finding in the 21st century that our children are lacking as they move into the career field, right? Because you have the content, but you can have the content and leave. And if you don't have those self-management skills, if you don't know what it's like to navigate through problems, right, then struggle in the workforce. And so it's really, my job is really great. I love it. It's helping equip our teachers, it's helping equip our administrators to permeate that knowledge and that modeling for our kids. And one thing that really has, it's taken up in education across the country is something, trauma-informed care, because we understand that trauma impacts lives in so many ways. And in Cleveland, we're really tackling that head on.
And there's a whole new type of trauma that's been added into in the last couple months, because it might be people's home situations and life situations and the traumas there. And then all of a sudden, we have 100,000 plus deaths in our country and schools closing down. There's a certain level of trauma that can come from that experience. And then now you can't turn on the TV without seeing cars burning and officers with knees on necks. And I mean, it's just, you can't watch some of the things that you watch and not have an emotional reaction. And for some of the children, that could lead to trauma. So it's a whole new world we're dealing with, but everything that you've been working in is so relevant still.
And one thing that was so easily dismissed is that a lot of times trauma manifests itself as anger. So we have generations where trauma has perpetually occurred. Anger is just simply a symptomatic manifestation of that trauma, right? And when people look and you see, like you said, you see on TV, why are people so angry, right? Well, there's been generations of trauma in in communities. And so this anger is bubbling up, and if you don't have those self-management skills to try to navigate through that anger, what else are you going to do? It's going to come out one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And I know even for me, who has done a fair amount of therapy and counseling, who generally is a pretty, I won't call myself always laid back. But I'm not just like the typical stereotypical angry black man. And yet I've had anger, I mean, I've had to literally not type some things on Facebook and not share some posts, and I've had to like go woosah myself. So, anger is something that I think a lot of people are dealing with, where sometimes I just have to pray like, Lord, take this away from me, or help me have a healthy conversation. Give me a verse. And,
Right.
Your perspective, you talked about the experiences of towns, the experiences of cities. And, the city that we grew up in the same town. And we had probably different experiences in some ways, but powerful, impactful experiences. In a small town, especially like one that we grew up in, you see like the best of people and the worst of people. I met some of the most loving, caring people who wanted to take me in and make me one of the family. And they looked at me like that when I was 16, and now I'm 36. And if I walk through the city of Conneaut, Ohio, they still look at me that way. I'm just one of their sons. I'm one of their nieces, one of their nephews, right? Like I'm a family member. And that type of loving community definitely exists where we grew up. The truth is, though, that there's also racist beliefs and bias and some prejudices and hatred that also exists where we grew up. And that was, a part of my journey. I made a recording called Colorblind, and I shared a little bit of my experience. Well, you have also had an interesting experience growing up in that town from the other side. Because why don't you tell them what part of your experience is growing up in Conneaut?
Right. And so, yeah, I would say that I come from a law enforcement family, and that end I am proud of the service that both my father and my brother are still providing for our community at large.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what I learned about grace, humility, what it means to walk with honor came from my dad. And he was a dedicated public servant. And so much of my value system was instilled by that law enforcement experience, even though I've never wore the badge,
Mm-hmm.
right? You walk justly, you show mercy, you walk humbly, right? And so that leads into the narrative that is being woven today, right? But on the other end of that too is my experience as I have Black children.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I now have been awakened to in the past 6 years is what it means, and I'm not an expert on what it means, but I am what it means to be Black in America today.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that it's rare to find that overt racism, right? It's now even more insidious than that because it's being covered. It's more subtle, but yet still very poignant. And an example I would give is my son played soccer, and everyone, it doesn't matter what team scored a goal. They were at the age where when you scored a goal, everybody clapped.
Right. Yep.
However, when my son scored his goal, the crowds were silent.
Mm.
And I would have never been keen or aware to that had
It was your son.
not had Jameer as my son, right? So I see what is happening in our country today, and I can only say if you're not moved by what you're seeing, you have a stone cold heart.
Mm.
And what I'm really finding now is justifications for why people believe what they believe.
Right.
Why there's justification for why Black lives don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Why there's justification for why all pigs should die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as I try to process this, and as I move through this, one thing that really has kind of culminated for me is the fact that if an entire group can remain nameless and faceless, they are easy to demonize, right?
Yes.
If
Yes.
people of the color of skin remain a nameless, faceless group to me, then they are automatically inferior.
Mm-hmm.
If people who wear a certain color for a profession or a badge are nameless or faceless, I get to determine what name they go by. And that name is, for the one side is pig, right? For the other side, it's thug. It's these names that we come up with because we refuse to see people as human.
That's good, Joe.
So I think that really, again, leading us down to a faith-based narrative is that names are so important. In Isaiah 43:1, God says, I call you by name. Right? So if he calls you by name, one thing to erase humanity is if I can eliminate who you are.
Go ahead and talk, Joe.
And so that's what we're seeing really on both sides. You're seeing hurt and anger on both sides. I do not deny that, right? People will view this both as senseless. Well, why are you protesting? Why can't you just peacefully protesting, right? Well, why would you choose that profession? Why would you choose a career where the power is, negatively manifested? And so what I look at is there needs to be reform at the top level, right? But in my opinion, and this is just my humble opinion again, is that when we are, in this instance, targeting the police, what you are targeting is the hammer, right? So let me give this analogy. If I have a hammer and I keep hitting a nail crooked, and I keep saying this hammer is faulty, this hammer is worthless, we have to look at the hand who's holding the hammer, right? And so if we're looking at the police force as the problem, and believe me, this is a profession, and I know it's been echoed before, you can't have one bad apple in the police force. You just can't. There are certain professions in the United States you cannot have that. But if we're focusing our time and energy at strictly the police, we're avoiding the greater picture here in which the system of oppression has been the hand holding the hammer. The hammer has always been the visible target because it is what we see. But the hand holding the hammer is really where that reform, and reform really has to happen at the highest level, but it begins with the heart, right? That's where it starts.
And at the voting booth.
And that's, wow, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
They vote their values. So if, you can't be absent of that mindset. Again, coming from a law enforcement family with Black children, I would be remiss if I said, sometimes, especially for my son, I get scared for what life will be like for him when he can no longer be under the covering of his mom, his dad. What's life going to be like for him? And, I'm very open about race in discussions with him. Because obviously when you have Black children into a white family, questions pop up. And he has to answer questions that I would never have to question, even from outside perspective. When just comments and comments from all races, both negative and positive, about what a white family is doing with Black children, right? Questions from simply, well, you don't know how to do their hair, to, and are these your foster children? Or plan B, or you know what I mean? So people we just are a walking enigma to so many people. Like, it's just, and it really, when people are caught off guard by what they see, their true emotions come out. And so in looking at what that is it really resonates a deeper call to justice even within me. And I'll tell you, for me, I have to call out by name. You like George Floyd, right? Arbery. But even then, on the opposite side, Patrick Underwood, who was shot, right? All these, if we lose the name in all this chaos, we lose the meaning. And left to our own, I don't want to say demise, but our own experiences. And oftentimes our own experiences are fueled by our own selfish narrative that we've brought within ourselves. So,
and and I'll take you a step further, Joe. When I think about officers, if I let myself think about, was he a sergeant? Your father? Sgt Stephen Garrix, right? When I think about him and give him a name, it gives me a different perspective of what police can be. Because, so So for those of you who don't know, in high school I ran track, and Joe's father was my track coach. And when you play sports, sometimes you still deal with prejudice, and sometimes you still deal with people with questionable characters. When I say that Joe's dad was one of the most loving, caring, heartfelt people that I ever came across, viewed every person as a person, but wanted to get to know you. What are your struggles? Are you okay? Is everything all right at home? Is there anything I can do to help you? Just because you're on my team and I want to love you like I love my own children. That was Sgt Garrix, right? And so even sometimes when we get to understand the names of the officers, it helps us understand, it's what you said, some professions can't have bad apples. And sometimes what has happened, unfortunately, in the history of our country is that when these major tragedies have happened, everybody pretends that the bad apple is a good apple. Well, they're risking their life, so we can't question them. No, we're supposed to question them, because a person who does something that are actions that none of the other officers on the force would take, then they're a bad apple and they're giving a misrepresentation of what an officer is. I could only imagine, it's not just the guy with his knee on the neck, right? It's the ones who had their hands on the feet and who stood and watched. They were also charged. And I'm thinking about, well, if your father was standing there, what would he have done? And because I literally know his personality and know his character, he's tackling somebody. Like, he's stopping something. Like, he's not letting that continue. I know his character that well to know that. And so when we pretend that there aren't police officers who would do that, we discredit what could happen. And also we lower the expectations of people. We should expect for the good officers to speak. I saw something, it was an interview with the boss, the police chief of the officers in Minnesota. And he stood on a camera and said, I fired them because they did the wrong thing. And I fired all of them because, in my opinion, they were equally complicit in this. So when I look on Facebook and I see people trying to justify the actions and saying, well, there's a reason it happened, and we don't know what happened before the camera, and you shouldn't have resisted, and blah, 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 blah. Their boss says this was wrong. And when our officers are willing to speak like that, and they break that, what is they call it, like the blue code of silence or whatever they call it, right? Or wall of silence. When people speak, you show the world that not all officers are bad people, and that some really have a heart for justice and a heart for the people and a heart for their community, and would lay down their life for their community and mean it, whether the community member was black or white. We need to get to a point where people speak the truth, so that people who look like me can hear the officers say that. Or even for you to speak like you're doing today, it helps the world see what it is to grow up in a house where you grew up with a man of honor and integrity, and how it shaped your own values, because now you raise black children with the same love you would have if they were white. And then also within the Cleveland schools, there's nothing but diversity. And so your heart for taking care of the children goes beyond race, because you want to get to know the individuals.
Right. And I think, Maurice, that even really draws to the greater picture and how systems are even complicit with each other in oppression, right?
Mm.
In education, we have something called the school to prison pipeline, where our males of color are so disproportionately suspended as opposed to their white peers. And so when we're looking at systems, it's not just law enforcement, it's not just education, but there's a complicity with multiple systems across this country that have been aimed at targeting a certain subsect of society, of a category of people, right, from succeeding. And when I say when we look at the demographic of teachers across the country, not just Cleveland, but the number of teachers who entered the workforce, most are young white females, right, who are bringing their experiences into the classroom. And in urban areas, there's not necessarily any courses around diversity, so to speak, that many of our institutions of higher learning offer. So if you're coming into an urban environment without, and I've had conversations with teachers around this, right? In my dissertation, I highlighted a couple of these points where just many of our new teachers were shell-shocked because they had no diversity experience, or they came from a family narrative where diversity was not appreciated. And so when you're talking about crafting young minds and even the responsibility of educating all children, we in the education world have to take a hard look at what our personal biases are, what our prejudices are, and what our value systems are. Because I'm going to be honest, if you are going to be a white teacher standing in front of children of color, what is your goal? What do you see for these children? What are your expectations for their learning, right? Can they succeed, say, as they would in a Solon district? In our Cleveland kids, do you hold them to those expectations? And so when we're talking about everything that's going on in our nation, right, we have to look at multiple systems across the country that have been complicit in what we're seeing right now.
Mm. So Joe, and we don't have a ton of time left. There's a couple more things I want to cover. So, let's start to transition a little bit. So you're a part, let's say you're a part of the broken system, education, law enforcement, whatever it is let's say that you are self-aware enough to know maybe there's a problem in the institution you work in or a part of. How do you make a difference? How do you grow? How do you change? How do you evolve? From your perspective, what can a person do so that they can begin to become more self-aware, so that they can be, for lack of better words, that they can have less ignorance on things? And I don't mean ignorance like in a slanderous way. I mean, I'm literally ignorant to what these problems are, and maybe I need to get to know them. If that is your perspective and your perception, how does a person get more knowledge, more wisdom from your perspective and your point of view?
Well, that is like the $1 million question, Maurice. It really is, because this is where I think it's the biggest hurdle to jump as an individual, because first you have to be very self-reflective and very honest with yourself as to where your value systems lie, right? And you have to be honest enough to say, you know what, I haven't always been correct in my thinking. And if you can come to the point where you have been incorrect and you realize that you've been incorrect in your thinking, it's going to lead you to wanting to learn. And then when you want to learn, you're going to want to take that knowledge and share it where you see a narrative now that you know is just not true. So it goes from self-awareness, self-reflection, to knowledge, to then organic discussion, right? If I just blast somebody on Facebook, you see it all the time in public threads and things like that, where people just constantly attack each other, right? Because what you have is the unwillingness to see another perspective or acknowledge another experience, coupled with I don't know you, so there's the name portion, coupled with I just haven't wanted to learn. So when you start to see a narrative, it has to first start with, you have to be strong enough to have those conversations with people that you know. Because if you have those conversations with people that you do not know, then you're going to run against a brick wall. And that's not just this conversation, that's with faith, that's with anything, because people only want to know what they want to know, and you can't tell that, right? So you have those conversations with people that you know, where the narrative is counter to what is right. I'm just going to use the word what is right. And then from that discussion, I mean, really what we're seeing now is voice, right? And the voice is such a powerful platform, because when you use your voice, you speak from your experience, right? And so it doesn't matter if we're talking about racial inequality, it doesn't matter if we're talking about faith, right? My whole, let's just segue into faith. The way that I view faith and the way now I talk about faith has dramatically changed, because I used to be about theology, and I think theology is extremely important, right? But if I'm trying to talk to somebody about my faith and I hammer them with theology, guess how much they care? They can research that on their own. If they wanted to, they could crack open, for my faith, it would be the Bible, and look at that and say, okay, I'm willing to learn.
Mm.
What you want to know is when someone asks you, for my person, why do you believe in God? They're not asking for my theological defense.
Mm.
What they're asking for is my personal experience for why I believe what I do.
Mm.
And even more so, how can I believe in a God? And they're usually, and oftentimes, Maurice, what I find is that those questions stem is from a place of hurt,
Yes, yes,
where
yes.
representation of who God was supposed to be to them hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
Had a maybe it was a tragic event in their life that they did not see any divine intervention in. And so then from their experience again, and coupled with that hurt, leads to that, well, there can be no God. And it comes
Mm.
from a place of anger. It comes from a place of hurt. And we see what hurts and anger does. It
Mm-hmm.
destroys. And then
And that, I would say, that's the central point, right? That's the hinge point in how faith and the crises that we've had in our country recently, the anger, the hostility, the hurt, the place in which those two things diverge is the heart. Right? Because there's people with broken hearts and broken spirits because they look around and see venom and hatred and they see it for centuries. Or they've seen just disappointment and hurt in their own lives, and there's trauma and there's tragedy. And where our faith comes in, and the reason that people can connect with a man like you, which is why I'm so happy you're talking, is because you don't say many things without passion. When you speak about your children and watching your child play soccer and score the goal, we see the love in your eyes for your child. And when you talk about your family growing up, we see the love there. And when you talk about the changes that are needed in the school system, we see the passion. And because I know you personally, I know the passion that you bring to the table when it comes for, your love of Christ, your love of God. It's the heart. That is the place in which these two things intersect. And that's why you always have to speak to the hurt of men. Yes.
right. And there's a strong misconception that if you have faith, bad things don't happen. And that's a lot of times where hurt stems from, is that if I am following God,
Mm-hmm.
that these things should not happen to me. And the one theological thing that I will insert is that we are guaranteed trial and tribulation. We
Sure are. It's right there in the word.
right.
Multiple times.
And so we are not immune from that. I mean, there's still things in the world that I look at and I say, God, where are you?
Mm.
Right? Where were you when George Floyd was crying out for his mother?
Mm.
This was a servant of, George Floyd was a good man who served the Lord. How could this happen to him?
Mm.
Right? And I don't have those answers, right? Except that there is also another entity at work that seeks to destroy the good of man. It seeks to destroy, right? And I wrote that it simply put, the wages of sin is death, right? And we see that hate, which is obviously a sin, the destruction that is raining down. I mean, look, you have a church divided, you have a country divided, you have a people divided, you have families divided, right? And we look at this and we say, how could it get to this point?
Mm.
But what we fail to realize is that sin has always been there. And when sin comes to light, which it is now coming to light and it has been coming to light as of recent, there will start to be justice enacted. And when we look at justice, right, our definitions of justice are probably very much different because it's based, again, in perspective. And so that's when I hear and I see spray painting, well, we need to kill a cop or kill a pigs, right? In my mind, that is just because of what I've seen has happened, right? If I look and I say, well, justice was enacted because he shouldn't have been there forging $20, or he shouldn't have been on the corner trying to sell cigarettes illegally, right? And so our even our view of justice is skewed. The journey of faith is oftentimes very hard and is tried very often. I would be remiss if there are times in my life where I could say that I did not walk away from my faith, because there are times, and often times where, again, through seasons of hurt, where I looked and said, this should not be happening. Why is this happening? Where are you, God?
And
Right?
I would even say that, and I won't speak for everyone, right? Because everybody has different journeys. But for me, and I know for you, we knew that we knew that we knew that we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God was real, even though we might have believed before, but then, you know, life hits you and you waver a little bit secretly. um, but I knew that I knew that I knew that God was real in some of my darkest moments when he came in and swooped
Right.
in. And
Right.
I know that that's the case for you too. And I think that that's important right now. You're speaking from this place of you feel the hurt from different perspectives. And you're literally, if you can't turn on the Facebook without somebody saying something that hurts you to your core because it's a judgment of your family on in terms of your father and your brother, or something that hits you and hurts you in terms of your family, and it's your son and your daughters, right? That, like, there's always something attacking.
Right.
And so how do you cling to your faith? What makes your faith so strong? Or what is something that you could share about your faith journey that is something you lean on or reminded of, that helps you know that, yeah, maybe we live in a fallen world that doesn't believe that God is real, but
Right.
you know beyond a shadow of a doubt in an unshakable way. What do you lean on? How do you know that?
So, so I grew up Pentecostal. So, so there were, I grew up in the church, right? So I was just inundated with spiritual principles my entire life. I served in ministries, right? I served and helped youth group. I served as a college and career pastor, so to speak. I've always been involved in the church in some capacity in the area of serving. So faith has always been central to my life. And I really would say that it was not really tested until I was going through a season of what I just mentioned earlier, of hurt, right?
Mm,
And the cataclysmic experience, and I'm just going to say this. So the story that I'm going to share, hardly anybody knows, right?
mm,
My parents know about this story that I'm going to share. So this is, and the reason is that this story has always been more of a source of shame for me, until
mm,
God really dealt with me about it and said, this is not shame, this is a testimony, right?
mm,
Because it dealt with a weakness that was in me.
mm-hmm,
And we are taught that when you show weakness, I don't even want to say taught, it's modeled, when you show weakness, then you are less than.
mm-hmm,
And so this is the cataclysmic event in my faith was just that. It really defined how I saw God. It defined, even through the years of growing the church, it defined how I showed God to others. And so during this season of hurt, there was, I vividly remember, it was a Sunday, and my mom called me and she said, "Are you coming to church?" I said, "No, I'm not going to church, Mom. I got to do some stuff." And so I went home, and when I went home, it was like this tangible weight of everything that I was going through just hit me all at once, right?
mm,
I think it was, in looking back, it was the weight of sin, it was the weight of guilt, it was the weight of shame, it was the weight of everything.
mm,
And those who hear this may be like, "Oh, that didn't happen." But when I tell you that I hit the floor under this weight, like, I think it was God allowing me to feel the weight of even what just a moment experience of what maybe Jesus felt carrying that cross,
mm,
right? And I could not lift myself under this weight. And I just had this overcoming feeling of helplessness, of hopelessness, of worthlessness, of all these feelings, right?
I've been there, yeah.
And I remember literally crawling, like physically crawling, to get out of the house, and I get into my car and I drive to my safe place, which is my parents' house,
Mm,
right? Which, sidestep, that's why when George Floyd was crying out for his mom, it hit me, because
mm,
that's my safe place, right? My parents are the ones who are going to accept me regardless of what's going on.
mm,
And so my parents are at church, and my mom leads worship at church. My dad at that point was doing the sound for the church. So I knew they weren't going to be home, but I still was drawn to my parents' house. So I get to my parents' house and I open up the door, and my sister's there. I'll never forget the look on my sister's face when I came busted through the door. She was just wide open, and she said, "Oh my gosh," she said, "Joe, what is going on?" Because I was just a mess.
Mm.
And you do not look okay. And I remember saying, "I'm not okay." And we just kind of looked at each other in silence. And she said, "I gotta go to work, but what do you want me to do? Do you want me to stay?" I said, No, you go, because I got composure at that point.
Mm.
And then where that hurt turned into rage. And I remember plopping myself in my dad's chair and just staring at the TV screen and contemplating, reflecting everything that was going on in my life. And I remember talking audibly like we're talking now, and I started cussing God out. And I said, "I served you, I did this, I did that, and this is what I'm going through. You are not real." And I remember just for a good 5-minute rant laced with all the defaming language, probably blasphemous language you could think about. I just let it ran. And I remember at that point saying, "You know what? You're not real." And at that point, under the weight of everything I was feeling, I said, "I'm just going to end it all." Maurice, I said I'm going to end it all.
Mm.
And I'm going to keep myself composed to this interview, because even when I think about this, it just brings me to a place of where I see his mercy and his grace. And I remember standing up from my dad's chair, and I had both my middle fingers raised to the heavens.
Mm.
And I said, "If you truly are God, then you will stop this. But because there is no God, you won't." And as soon as I turned to go to where I believe my dad kept his gun, I see a car pull into my parents' driveway. It was 11:30. By all counts and purposes, everybody was still in church, doing worship, doing sound. And I look, and out comes my dad from the car, and he does not know. So if he hears this, he's going to be floored.
Mm.
And I just look, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And as again, audibly like we're hearing now, I hear God tell me, "Joe, I love you. You have a lot to live for. You are worth more than you can imagine." And I'm like, just in a state of shock. I couldn't move. And then comes my dad, and he looks at me, and he says, "Oh, hey, Joe." He said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on." He said, "But I just want you to know, son, I love you. You have a lot to live for." And so what my heavenly Father told me was echoed by my earthly father. And I just started to cry. And my dad looked at me, and he didn't know what was going on. And I never shared with him what was going on. But at that point, that was the most pivotal moment, the pivotal experience I had with God, right? That is the moment now where I can attest to, this is where God is real. But I can also attest to that, man, I know what it feels like to have lost all hope. And if we are in a hopeless world, and I just had a glimpse of that under the pressure and the weight, I just can't imagine living a life to that end. And God gave me a scripture that I really clung out to through, because the season didn't stop right there. I'll tell you, the season even got harder, right? The season didn't stop, but he gave me Psalm 27:13 that says, "I will see the goodness of God while in the land of the living."
Mm-hmm.
To get to heaven to feel the goodness of God, that he promised that he's going to show me his goodness while I'm here on earth.
Mm.
Not without trial, not without tribulation, not without testing, right? But that it is his word that's going to go forth. And when people ask me how I know there's a God, I just share my experience. Because one, I'm not going to argue faith with you, because we can argue that all day, right? But this is in my moment of weakness, in my moment of anger, in my moment of rage, God still said, "I love you and you're worth more than you ever know."
Mm.
You know what, Mo? He called me by name.
Mm-hmm. By name.
He said
By name.
by name. And so in looking back, that instilled in me, I always had faith, but it gave me perspective of God's mercy. We always talk about God's grace. But in a moment where I am raising middle fingers to the air,
Mm-hmm.
all these things to God, right? It taught me about grace. And so if God, in the face of that, who has created everything, and his creation is cussing him out,
Mm-hmm.
how much more grace can I have for those who are hurting out there?
Mm-hmm.
When they come at me with harsh words, I know a place from where it's coming. It's coming from a place of hurt. It's coming from a place of hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have empathy for them.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
connect with you and I say, I know this is not directed at me. This is coming from a place, right? And so that allows me to be able to hear you rather than dismissing you.
Mm-hmm. And see, and Joe, when you say something like that to me, you know, I hear the Holy Spirit in it, right? Because I'm just hearing, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Right? When you speak of that empathy that we need to have, you know, especially as believers, and I know some people who are watching this, you know, certainly would be believers, you know, we have a call and a duty to pray for those who persecute us, to pray for those who have hurt us, to give compassion, give grace, give mercy as God extends it. And sometimes we want to be judge, jury, and executioner for the people that we see who have wronged us as individuals or wronged us as a people. Look, anger is a natural reaction, and we all have it. We got to see Jesus tip over tables when he saw something that he perceived as wrong, right? He tore down that temple, tore that stuff apart.
Yeah,
And
yep.
so, not to say that we're supposed to live in anger all the time, because clearly we're not. But to feel emotion is to be human. But what do you do with it? And if you just allow that emotion and allow those things to consume you to the point where you never purge them, you never rinse from it, you never try to overcome it, you never grow from it, you just say, I was born angry, I'll always be angry, I'm supposed to be angry, that's just life. You miss out on some of the most beautiful things life has to offer.
Right.
You know, and so what I've heard you say and what I've heard you share this episode, right, is the fact that what people need more than anything is for you to take the time to see the people in front of you as people, not statistics, not just colors, not just a badge, but to see the people. And that does not mean to be colorblind.
Right.
It means to see them as people with a story and to wonder what the badge, what that had to do with their experience, and what the shade of color had to do with their experience, and what the systematic situation had to do with their experience, and how it shaped their experience. And the same goes for believers. If you're a person who's a non-believer, and you're trying to understand why people are so faithful, and why people swear that the blood of Jesus is real, even though you think it's make-believe, ask them for their journey and their experience, and stories like that, they change perception. But also for the believers, sometimes when we stand in front of a person and they say they don't believe, sometimes what they're really saying is, I was hurt and now I feel lost and I don't want to believe, because if I believe, then it means he let something happen. Sometimes it's a complicated way of viewing things. I have been able to help, you know, as I'm a drug counselor, you know that. Some of the viewers may or may not know that. And, you know, I do Bible study. I do a non-denominational service every week. I joke often, because of the fact that my place of business never shut down and I still gave services every week. I was one of the only pastors in the United States of America giving messages to live parishioners over the last several months. And so many people sit down in the chair and they say, well, I don't believe in God, but I'll sit here and listen to what you have to say. And when they start crying and the emotions start coming out of them as the message is going, I always know that when they said, I don't believe in God, that was not the whole story. That wasn't all the facts, and that there's probably something else within their story that's necessary to understand. And because then I know the person and can call the person by name and the tragedy they've been through by name, then when I say the name of Jesus, they feel heard, and they have a tendency to believe and even feel the power more greatly because they know that they've been seen. And I think that is true witnessing. That's true evangelism. Do you really take the time to know the person you're sitting in front of, or do you just have an agenda when you're sitting in front of them? Yes, we all as believers have an agenda to spread the kingdom, but there's a way of going about it, and it has to do with compassion. The reason that the woman at the well believed Jesus was because he knew her story, right? And because he could give her story, she went and said, I met a man who told me everything I've ever done. That was what got her to want to witness. And later on, when the whole community had turned towards Christ and turned towards God, and they all believed, it was because of one person who was seen. And so I think that what you said today, Joe, I'm sorry, I just went on a rant, but is powerful and it's necessary. And I hope especially for maybe some of the people who don't really believe racism exists, or who think that it's all exaggerated, or who don't really think that things are systematic, that you, being a person who is white, who did not necessarily believe, or I won't even say believe, who was not necessarily exposed to some of those things younger in life,
Right.
your ability to speak to it should show people how real it is. And hopefully it makes people question, well, what haven't I been exposed to, or what am I missing if I was exposed but didn't see it? I was in the school system or am in the school system, but I don't see what's systematic. Well, which school system are you in?
Right.
You know, sometimes we have to ask more questions and do more investigation.
Right. I absolutely agree with what you just said, and it truly is powerful. I won't say that exposure is everything, right? Because
Sure not.
at the end of the day, we are still responsible for learning. That is still a charge that we have to have, right? But I will say, and I'll use this word, in a community where you never feel injustices, you just don't care. Because in that community where you never feel an injustice, it doesn't impact me. And so since it doesn't impact me and I can't form my experience around that, I am left to others to dictate what I should believe, right? So again, it goes back to, not to be redundant, but what we're talking about, you have to have that willingness to learn and have those tough conversations and want to have those conversations, right? And come to a place where eventually I need to change.
Well, Joe, I told you 30 minutes. We have blown 30 minutes out of the water, so my apologies for that, but I didn't want to stop because I thought that everything that was being said was necessary. So I guess my final question would be, what final thoughts do you have, for the people? And it can be, whatever it is that's just on your heart. And then also, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, or wanted to have you speak even, or wanted your perspective on something, how would people get a hold of you? I guess those are, my last questions for you.
Sure. So, man, I don't know how you even encapsulate everything we talked about, because it's just, I don't have any neat or tidy words to package what we said, but I think there needs to be, it starts within myself, that I have to look inner if I want to see outer change. And I know it sounds cliche, but it's the absolute truth, right? So I would hope that just from hearing this, people would even start to question within themselves, what do I believe? And not only what do I believe, why do I believe that? So I'll leave it there. And if someone wants to get a hold of me, probably email is the best way. I check it multiple times throughout the day. And I don't know if I give you that information, Maurice, or just
if you want, you can just give it to me. And how about we do this? If anybody wants to get Joe's information, my information is down there in the about section. You can reach out to me and I'll get you Joe's email address. How about if we do it that way?
That works great.
Perfect. Well, Joe, I thank you so much for just taking the time to do this interview today. Guys, when I said he is one of my nearest and dearest friends from childhood, I truly mean that. One thing that I never had to question or doubt about Joe was his character or his heart of gold. And I would say the same thing about his family. And Joe has been loyal through my entire life, even in the periods when we didn't talk as much, because that's just life, right? You don't always talk to your high school friends. I never had to wonder if I needed Joe, would he be there? And, I'm thankful for people like that who are in this world. And so, guys, I hope that you got something out of this, that you see that there are so many different stories, and it's not all black and white. Sometimes life is a lot of shades of gray. I hope that this made you think today. I hope that it made you question some things. Maybe it strengthened some things for you, or it showed you the further need to Ask some of your friends whose names you do know more questions, or some of your students or family members more questions because you know their name. Or if you need to read the books of people whose names you know, and people who you respect, and you know Martin Luther King, but do you know what he said? What he really said? A lot of times we respect people, but we really don't know all their story. We really don't know why it is that made them who they are. And I hope that this encourages you to take the time to ask the questions. And it's not just the racial questions, it's also the spiritual questions. Because one thing that's a theme whenever I talk to Joe these days is that Joe may have been in a hopeless place at one point in his life for a small period. But anytime I talk to Joe, Joe has hope. And, you know, faith is the evidence of things hoped for. So faith and hope go hand in hand, right? And so if you want to find faith, you're going to have to start by finding hope. And I believe that is part of the journey, part of the inner work that you must do. We have to do work on ourselves. If you feel heartbroken, if you feel lost, if you feel depression, anxiety, or any other emotions, if it's not just because of what you see on the TV, it's what you're seeing in your household, if it's the trauma and tragedy you've lived through, know that you have to do the work. And sometimes the work is journaling, and sometimes it's showing up to therapy, and sometimes the work is sitting down with God and praying for his strength, for his courage, for his love, so that just like Joe, your trial can be turned into a beautiful testimony. So with that, I thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Be sure to leave a comment down below. Share this video with anyone who needs to see it. Hit like on this, and then, of course, just check out all the other content on the channel. And we will be back next Tuesday with another fantastic guest. My name is Maurice F. Martin, and this has been another episode of today's Inspiration and Motivational Tuesdays.